Hey, 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 it is 5:30 on Wednesday. You know what time it is. It is happy hour with Dr. Lisa. I am Dr. Lisa. I am your host. And I am so excited to chat with all of you about my blog. We are all the way on blog 40 already. Blog 40 is called Silent Children. If you want to chime in, and join me live. You can do that on Podbean. I am also live on Instagram, both of my Instagram pages. One is public. You can get on that one if you want to see me talk about these stories live, or you can get onto Facebook. I am actually live on Facebook. I never do that anymore. You can also give me a call and ask me your questions. 765-205-1959, or you can email me at kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. There is so much to talk about. I decided that I am going to talk about two topics before I even get to my blog. One of them is actually very similar to my blog, so that's a good thing. I was going to have questions about what happened between Will Smith and Chris Rock. So I am going to give you my opinion, and I hope you're ready. Not everything is attributed to mental health. I said that on my Facebook page. When something happens like this, many, 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 many millions of people saw it happen, including me. And people want to attribute it to mental health. Although I have a love and passion for mental health, I do believe that some situations occur because in that moment, that's the way that that person felt. So unfortunately, Will was mad and he reacted, and that's my opinion. Now, could he have some deep rooted feelings because they've gone through so much? He probably can have that, or he probably does. But to me, there's no justification for putting your hands on someone, period. Um, and you don't go around battering people just because you're mad or just because you don't like what they said. That's the kind of stuff that we teach kids. We teach kids that it's not okay to put their hands on people. It's just not. And so if we all applaud Will for what he did, then why are we teaching kids that it's wrong to hit other kids? Why are we doing that? We are actually lying to children if we tell them, yes, it's not okay for you to do it, but I did it, right? It's okay for me to do it, for me to just go out and hit someone because they talked about me. Every day I have conversations with children about not reacting that way toward other children when they get mad. Now, I can accept that kind of behavior personally from a child. I could probably be okay with that if we were talking about 20-year-old Will Smith from West Philly. But we are actually talking about 54-year-old Will, who should have a sense of control at this point. What he did right was to finally apologize to Chris Rock. And that is my opinion about it. Chris Rock is a comedian. He was doing his job. Comedians talk about people. If you put your business out into the public eye, as Will and Jada have, then all bets are off with regard to what people say about you. If you are going to tell everyone publicly, for example, that you have an open relationship, was it wrong for it to be a joke at the Oscars? No. And he certainly didn't slap her. So when you put everything out on public display, especially on, people on Facebook always tell their business, and I will never understand that. You guys getting so personal on social media, but people do it, and then they get upset when people joke about it. In the grand scheme of things, that doesn't make sense. So they put their business out there. It's a free range for however people want to interpret it and talk about it. But when it becomes the butt of a joke, you don't get slapped for it. And that was wrong. These are two grown men. I'm sure they've settled it by now. And I'm glad they did. And they apologized to each other. So we all have a duty to forgive. So I hope that they've forgiven each other and they've learned from this situation. But it is not okay to go out and slap folks just because they talk badly about you. It's immature and it's stupid. And that's my opinion. All right. I have people who have asked me a really interesting question, and I want this to be the second point of conversation that I have today. Um, I talk on this blog about children that see ghosts, okay? Visual, they see them, okay? I also have encountered children that have visual hallucinations, and there's a difference. What I don't talk about are children that actually hear voices. I had a question about that today from someone, and then I noticed a couple of comments and questions about auditory hallucinations. So I want you to know that I hear you, and I am actually probably going to write a blog this week about it to address it. There are people out there who are truly curious about, auditory hallucinations. And I want to make sure you know that I hear you and that I can go in the opposite direction of visual hallucinations and or children that can see ghosts, just to answer your questions in my blog. Do I have experience with children that have had auditory hallucinations? Absolutely. Probably less than children who can see ghosts, because it's really rare to come across a kid who has auditory hallucinations. And so I actually came across a child that way recently, and it reminded me that some of you have asked me about auditory hallucinations. So we're going to address that on Friday. So I came across a kid who actually has auditory hallucinations, and this is very similar to what we're going to talk about today, because this is a child that I consider a silent child. And guess what? I was the one person that this kid opened up to talk about auditory hallucinations. So that happened to me again, being that only person. And we all encounter situations where we're quiet, where we just don't tell a lot of people what's going on inside of us. And I have to tell you that I am one of those people, ironically, who is not as sociable right now at work, for example. I only have select people that I associate with, um, because I'm more of an observer when I started a new job. Children sometimes keep a lot of things bottled up inside of themselves, just like we do as adults. That's what I'm doing right now. A lot of my thoughts and opinions and feelings, and also clinical experience, I'm not sharing with anybody right now. And so we sometimes live by the premise of silence is golden. Children do that too, but some of them for different reasons. So, pertaining to children that can see ghosts, they get quiet, the ones that I've experienced, for different reasons. They don't always want to share with everyone that they have disability. Sometimes I think that's a good thing. I used to when I work with them, because not everyone will understand or believe them. And sometimes children will get teased and all kinds of other negative things because they let the world know that they have disability. So sometimes when I don't want to deal with things, I get quiet. There are times when I shut down, because we're all human. Kids do the same things. So kids that are quiet, kids who actually saw ghosts but wouldn't tell anyone, kind of like one of the kids that I worked with who can hear voices, they shut down and they're quiet because they want to protect themselves from what they perceive as possibly getting hurt because they've shared it. I had a kid tell me, I just don't tell anyone. I don't talk about this stuff. I don't talk about my auditory hallucinations. I don't talk about, the ability to see ghosts. I just don't deal with it. I don't deal with it with other people. I keep it to myself. Now, here's the thing. These are difficult children to work with. They were very difficult for me. Children who open up and talk about their experiences are easier because you can kind of gauge their perspective, their feelings, their thoughts. With silent children, conversations were really difficult. I'll give you an example recently. I had to pull and pry and twist and jump and entertain and manipulate to get all of this information from a child who has auditory hallucinations, for example. That's the same battle that I fought with kids who could see ghosts but remain quiet. And so the silent children sometimes wouldn't even admit to seeing ghosts. Just like I knew that this kid had auditory hallucinations, I could tell after so many years and so much time working with nebulous children when kids can actually see ghosts. So it was all about their interactions and their behaviors around me. And that's what happened with a child who has auditory hallucinations. Obviously, you get training in psychology to know certain behaviors and certain conversations and certain answers to questions. We do get trained that way. The public likes to talk about how, psychology is a quack field. We're not scientists. This stuff is easy. Anybody can be a counselor. I had a car salesman tell me one time that he was actually a psychologist, and I wanted to choke him. Just because you listen to people doesn't make you a psychologist. Just because you're good at talking to people doesn't make you a psychologist. We are actually trained for years to understand these things. So when I saw certain symptoms in a kid who had auditory hallucinations, I knew exactly what was happening and thought to myself, this is a child who has auditory hallucinations. Once we were done with the interview, I was absolutely correct. This is a child who had auditory hallucinations. So, working with nebulous kids for so long, when they were silent children, I can almost observe them and see what they were actually experiencing, And ironically, they experienced some, or they had some of the same behaviors as children who would actually tell me, hey, I see ghosts. So I got pretty good at pulling out information with kids that wouldn't talk. That's what I want to say. And it's not something easy to do, and it's not something that I did pretty quickly, but it was definitely something that came over time. So here are a couple examples I'm going to share with you. And it's the same thing that a child did to me that has auditory hallucinations. So, being silent, staring at something, nodding of the head without thinking that I see them, or I saw them nodding their heads, looking as if something was talking to them in their ears. That's what the child who had the auditory hallucinations did. Looked as if he or she was waiting for answers, right? If I ask a question, waiting for answers, listening. You know how we look like, I'm demonstrating on Instagram, we look like we're listening to something? That's what these kids would do. And so, you know, looking behind me is another one. Like, remember, I told you guys that all of these kids saw angels behind me or around me or somewhere. A lot of these kids would look in the same direction as other kids who would tell me that there was an angel outside. So, for example, the angel in the tree. The kids who were silent would stare out the window at something in the tree, or they would stare behind me for a long time as if they were listening to something. Some of them would nod their heads. A child who has auditory hallucinations would stop after every sentence, get quiet, put the head down, and waited to answer. And I started to get suspicious just the same way I would get suspicious with these kids. I wish I can demonstrate it to you all. It's actually pretty fascinating. And so when you get around that several times over and over again, what happens is you develop your own way of assessing behaviors. And so that's what I would do. And then with a child who has auditory hallucinations, once they kind of start talking about the different voices that they hear, then you can start to build up what could be going on in your mind. For example, psychiatrically, for me, it was very simple. How many voices can this child hear? Or is it a male voice? Well, what kind of behaviors are they telling this kid to do? What kind of commands? Command is a chief word that we think about. Is there one that's more dominant? And how many are dominant? Or how many are, trying to get this kid to behave violently? There are different things. And is there one that's the protector? There are different types of questions. And so when you kind of go through those questions and the kids answer them, if the child does, most of the older kids will answer you. It's the same thing I did when I encountered a silent child, a silent, nebulous child, and when they really start to feel as if you're a safe person, as the child who heard voices did, then they really start to talk to you about how it possibly impacts their lives, which is what you want to go for, because you always want to assess how these things are impacting the child's daily living. Okay. And so the kid that had the auditory hallucinations is being impacted by the auditory hallucinations. And it is something that, is outside of the area of my expertise. So I'm going to go ahead and refer this child to someone else because that's what we do. So I will take care of this child until this child can start seeing someone else, because the auditory hallucinations are starting to impact his or her life or daily living. So there are certain buzzwords, and those same buzzwords, we can use for each child that we encounter for different conditions. So let's talk about child H, because child H is definitely a nebulous child who was silent and angry. And the funny thing is, I read through, I don't typically read through the blogs because I wrote them, so I know. And I also know what happened to me over the years, so I don't have to really go back and, sort through these blogs, excuse me, and read them before my podcast. But I really couldn't remember what we were going to talk about today. Chalk it up to age. And I went back and I glanced through this one and I said, child H, child H, child H, silent kid. And I clearly remember who this child probably is, but just in their 30s now, and what happened. So this was a kid who wouldn't talk to anyone. And so I needed to work with this child who was like a lot bigger than me, a lot stronger, right? And so this was an angry kid who would always sit in the window and just stare out the window, and would stare out at the trees and nod his or her head outside at the trees. And you could see that there was a conversation taking place, and it was around other people. So it just wasn't me, it was around other people. And it was in class. So when I would walk in there, I could still see it. When I would walk in there, I go, God, this kid is having some type of conversation with something, right? I wasn't as well versed with working with kids that can see ghosts, but I've had at this point I had enough of them to kind of recognize what was going on. And so I'm like, who is it? Oh boy, out of the tree. Oh boy, not in the head. Oh boy, who is this kid talking to? And so I had to think back. This was also the same place where I met um, another child who can see ghosts that I talked about in earlier blogs. And I'll tell you, this is off the blog for a second. They had a lot of the same behaviors, except the other child was not angry. So staring out the window, staring out at the trees, because there were trees by the school, and just not just these two kids, but a lot of them seem as if they have internal conversations with these ghosts, and just like a child who has auditory hallucinations, right? And like nobody else can hear this stuff but these kids. And so that's what child H was doing. And it was a conversation that I would ask child H about. Obviously he or she was defiant and wouldn't tell me, and I wanted to know, right? The other kid in the same building would tell me conversations. And the thing about child H, however, is that I would sometimes sit and just watch what would happen. And this was an angry kid, a teenager, but not angry toward me. Like, don't sit next to me, or don't, you know, talk to me. Or you get some kids like that. This kid was not like that. This kid was just kind of like, just let me be. So for the first couple of times I went to go see this kid, I'm like, okay, I'll just let you be. And then I figured out quickly that this was just a defiant kid, not rude, not nasty, just like, no, I don't want to deal with any of you, go away. And so my initial response to those kids is just to kind of respect, put out there what I'm there for, what kind of help I can provide, and then just leave them be and continue to expose myself to those kids. So I let them start coming around me. The more that I expose myself to those kids, like, hey, how you doing? Don't forget to come and see me when you get a chance. If you're having a bad day, you can come right in here and talk to me, punching bag, whatever you want to do. And the funny thing is, this kid was silent, but would go out in the hallways and curse like a sailor. I'd be like, whoa, my ears, good Lord. You know, with all of the cursing and stuff, then come right back in. It was just unbothered and quiet. And I didn't want to give up on this kid. I mean, it took a long time. And you don't want to force therapy or testing on any kid. And this was a kid old enough to make the decision about not seeing me as well, but did not do that. And so I initially didn't do it. So I decided to ask directly one day, what are you talking to? And this kid cursed me out. And I thought, whoa. Later on, I found out why this kid cursed me out, and that it had everything to do with what was being seen. Remember, I said sometimes dark angels would tell kids to do stuff? Yeah. So that was this kid's experience with me. And so I still didn't give up originally. What I did was I started kind of looking out the window with this kid, saying, what do you see? What's going on? Just kind of push myself on this kid to find out what was happening, um, and if this kid could truly see ghosts. And I don't typically ask kids, hey, do you see ghosts? I don't do that. And I've already explained why I don't do that. Um, but whatever was going on, I saw an increase in this kid's behavior and anger, an increase in it, not a decrease. So I felt like, this is a kid who had all the signs of seeing ghosts, right? All of them, all of the signs and symptoms that I saw in other kids. including being in the hallways talking to something that wasn't there. I'm an observer of everyone's behavior. Always have been since I've been trained that way. That's how my advisor trained us. We had to do things like go to schools and stuff and watch kids on the playgrounds because to him, that was the best way for us to learn a child's behavior, even a group of kids, little boys, roughhousing each other and stuff like that. And so I'm an observer of behavior because I've been trained that way. So I would sit back and actually watch this kid and watch what was going on. And I was like, you know, um, this is a child who can see ghosts, right? Now, over time, it didn't matter if this kid can see ghosts or not. You know why? Because he was defiant and would not cooperate. So at one point, you couldn't ask this kid anything. You couldn't ask this kid anything because this kid wouldn't answer you. So this kid escalated. I would say stuff like, "What are you looking at behind me?" "Nothing. Get the F out of here." Stuff like that. And I'll go, "Okay. There is something behind me. You just don't want to tell me." So with a defiant kid, at times I could be more assertive with them, because you have to be, because you can't show weakness to these kids now. So I would get a little bit more assertive, like, "You are looking behind me. What are you looking at behind me? I'm right here. Look me in the eye." And see, that's not an assumption to that kid that they can see ghosts. That's more of a, "Why are you looking behind me? Look at me. Why are you looking in the corner? I'm right here. Look at me. Why are you staring out the window when I'm talking to you? Look at me. I want to talk to you. I want to help you." And then following something in the room, nodding the head, talking to me. I'm like, "Who are you talking to?" So honestly, this could have been a kid that had some mental health concerns. I don't know, because you know what happened? I was not able to see this kid anymore because this was a child who was legally able to say that she or he did not want services. And so, because that is a legal child, I had to go ahead and do what? Stop seeing this kid. Yep. So I called the mama and said, "Hey, I am so sorry. Your child is old enough to make the decision as to whether or not she or he wants to have therapy and psych testing. And I think your kid is just done with it, does not want it anymore. It's just over it." And so this mother was so disappointed. She was so upset. I said, "This child is looking around the room." Some of the things I just told you all. And I said, "And I just can't get a good feel, for what's going on, other than your kid doesn't want to work with me. Maybe I'm just not the right match. I'm not always matched well with anybody." And this mother said, "No, my kid sees ghosts. We've been talking about it for years." And I went, "I knew it. I knew it. I knew it." But this is a child who just did not want to work with me, right? And so sometimes if you are in this field of mental health, everybody will not want to work with you. Now, some of these kids that are tested all the time, this is why I'm on the side of giving kids a break every now and then. For example, special education students, you don't have to test them every 3 years. Some of these older kids have been tested every 3 years and they're just so sick of it. That's the position that this kid was in. This kid was a senior in high school, getting ready to leave, and just said, "You know what? I'm just done. I don't want this anymore. I don't want testing. I don't need an IEP. I don't need accommodations, on the workplace. I'm not going to college, so I don't need accommodations on a college campus. I'm done with it. I'm done with you. I'm done with everything psychology. Goodbye." Right? And so the mom was just really, really disappointed. And I told her, legally, I have no grounds to continue this. This kid just didn't want to do it. So, it was a tough time for me. Um, I tried to pull this kid out a couple of times, and some of you in this field will also do the same thing. And there are kids sometimes that we just can't reach. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because a lot of us who are in the helping fields, we want to help kids. But this child H was one that I couldn't do anything to um, get this kid on board, even positive encouragement. Because I think at one point, instead of testing, I said, well, then let's just talk to each other. Because what I was going to do was to do some anger management. Excuse me, there's a program that I like you use. Excuse me, I can't talk, guys. I'm sorry. To use for anger management. And that's what I was going to do with this kid, since he was, his behaviors were um, declining. And, you know, all this kid wanted to do was to be done. Um, so this may have been like around this time of the year, because I remember this was in St. Louis, and if I remember how the outside window looked where this kid sat, the trees had started to bloom. So it was nicer outside, and all I recall is this kid wanted to terminate services, and it was a nice day, and the flowers and the trees were bloom, but it wasn't graduation yet. So it's probably around this time of the year. And because this kid hadn't graduated yet, you know, I really wanted to work with this kid, but the answer was no. And so I had to discontinue immediately, revoke services, and then terminate therapy as well, which ended the therapeutic relationship, but it also revoked services for special education. So we had two different things going on. So there was a lot to learn from this situation. One of the things that I pride myself with, and I have throughout all these years, is my ability to establish positive rapport with people in general, but with kids and also with parents. And although I had a really good rapport going on with this kid's mother, I just could not get it at all from this child. And so when you have the best intentions for a child and you really want to help him or her, they sometimes will, especially teenagers, hold a lot inside. And so we have to come to terms with, we just can't help everybody. We just can't. For one, people have to be ready to receive the help, right? Just common sense. When they're not ready to receive the help, what happens? They reject the help. It's real easy. They reject the help. And so, even if you have the best intentions, you have to be cognizant of the fact that there are some people who just don't want to receive the help, or it's just the wrong time. You don't have to give up on them. You just have to kind of wait it out until they're ready. And unfortunately, like child H, some people will not be ready. So, what do? Let it go. That is the hardest reality about this field, that there are times when you just have to let people go. Now, you want to do it appropriately. You never ever abandon your clients. I have seen that come up repeatedly on various social media sites, and I've seen therapists even talk about, I just let the client go. When I say let go, I'm talking about your emotional need to help everyone. Even this child H, even though this kid didn't want services, I couldn't abandon him or her. I had to do it properly. I had to make sure the mother understood. Even though this kid was angry, I had to make sure there was an understanding there, and that we were revoking services, and that we were stopping therapy, and worked with that child probably no less than 45 minutes, making sure all of that was done. So you just don't want to abandon your clients. Stop doing that. I see some of you guys talking about, I just let them go, or I decided not to do it. If your clients abandon you, that's different. Child H abandoned me. But if you need to let a client go, even if it's something like your client is putting you in danger or harassing you, you have a right to protect yourself, and you don't have to see anyone who is putting you in harm's way, but you have to do it properly. So stop abandoning your clients. Don't do that to them. If you don't want to see them, you have to do a termination with them. Therapists know what I'm talking about. And so that was one thing, a couple of things that I learned with child age. I am positive that this kid saw ghosts. Um, I am aware of when something like seeing ghosts is occurring in a kid. When they are silent children, well, let me say this. There are times when I do tell kids to calm the noise, just stop telling people that you see ghosts. And I make them get silent about it. To me, as long as their parents were aware of it and they were safe and they weren't harming themselves, they aren't harming anyone else, no one's harming them, and they seem to be functioning well in school, those are the kids that I would kind of say, okay, I want you to be a silent child. I want you to stop telling everybody that you have the ability to see ghosts, because society doesn't accept it yet. Sometimes for silent children, it was just too hard on them emotionally. Now, it was hard on kids that would tell everybody. They kind of had the same problem. So silent children would keep it to themselves. Kids that weren't silent, who would tell everybody, needed to become silent. That's kind of a difficult thing to think about, because I said you want kids to talk. Well, you do, but not for the sake of, them being harmed because they're telling everybody they can see ghosts. The kids who were silent overall, as long as they were healthy, I was okay with it. They were kind of difficult anyway. The kids who were told, you have to quiet some of this, it was to help their mental health as well. Here's what would happen sometimes to these kids. They would share their experiences with their families about seeing ghosts, and some of their families wanted to celebrate it. I told you guys before, oh, do you see my deceased grandmother? Or my mom passed away. Do you see grandma? Or, I haven't seen my father in 30 years since he passed away. Is he here? And then kids would go, Halloween, are the ghosts coming out? And how cruel kids can be, and teasing them. So unfortunately, there were times with nebulous kids that I would have to tell them, hey, I need you to not tell everyone about this. You don't have to disclose to the world your business. You just don't. So you can be silent about this and healthy as well. And so when you have challenges with being quiet about it, I want you to come and talk to me about it. Talk to your parents about it, or anyone you trust. You may not be able to go wave a flag in the middle of the school hallway and say there's a little girl down the hallway floating around. Kids can be cruel. So as long as their mental health improved, or I felt as if they were safe and comforted and their parents knew, I was okay with teaching some of these kids to remain silent. On the other hand, when kids didn't want to tell anybody, and not even me sometimes, yet I would see them decline, then we had to work on it. So I hope that's clear, because there are two different, situations here. Again, one where the kids were silent overall, and another when I had to tell them to shut it down a little bit. Um, there were plenty of kids who would either tell their parents or they would remain silent about it. It just depends. Like I met a person who has auditory hallucinations, you know, who didn't tell anyone. Then I've met some kids who have visual hallucinations, which are different than seeing ghosts, and then auditory hallucinations, then kids who actually can see ghosts and they tell their parents. So it just depends on the kid, you know. Um, and some kids do have significant mental health concerns, on top of hearing voices, on top of visual hallucinations, on top of, you know, their ability to see ghosts. So you really have to be savvy to really pull out what is happening to a child's mental health. Um, and then sometimes I would work with the parents only to try to get them to help their kids talk about their experiences seeing ghosts when the parents knew. So sometimes their attempts were rejected as well. So when I would, here's what's funny, when I would encounter silent children who told me, well, that was the hard part, they would tell me that they wouldn't tell their parents. I would try so hard to get these kids to tell their parents, and they just wouldn't. Now, I didn't disclose it because remember, that's not something that needs to be disclosed. That is not a harm to themselves as long as it wasn't a harm to other people, somebody harming them, you know, something that would make me go ding, 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 ding. We got to disclose this legally to the parents, or if they want to harm someone else, to the person that they're going to harm and the police, stuff like that. So as long as we were in a situation where the kids were okay, they just didn't want to share it, I had to keep it to myself. You can't disclose it. However, if I had a just cause to disclose it, you know, like if a dark angel or something told a kid to jump off a cliff tomorrow, of course you disclose that kind of stuff. And you have to disclose that stuff legally. When the kids, silent kids, or kids in general, when they finally did open up about these things, guess what happened? Their mental health improved. Why? Because they were getting it off of their chest. I saw a kid smile today who shared, I haven't smiled in a long time because I have somebody to talk to this stuff about now. No one believed me, and I didn't trust anybody to tell, you know? And so they feel better. They feel like a weight has been lifted off of them. Excuse me. It is perfectly fine to start thinking of other ways to get these kids to talk to you. I had a kid a couple of weeks ago that I had draw some stuff from me just out of the blue because it was very difficult for this kid to express the type of visions seen. This was another kid that I got to talk about on my blog. I haven't talked about this child yet. There were pictures drawn because one of the ghosts was so scary to this kid that describing it made this kid scared again. And so it was easier to just kind of draw it out. So what you have to do is you have to come up with ways to get kids to talk to you. I love having kids, even teenagers, draw things for me. It's all about trial and error with kids. So you never know what will work. With silent kids, it's the luck of the draw. If they feel safe and comfortable, they may tell you things. And so this was probably an experience with Child H that shifted my learning with kids because I realized I am not a perfect psychologist or a person. And sometimes what we do just fails, it just doesn't work. So there you go. That is Silent Children, blog 40. So if you tune in next week, we are going to talk about prayer because there were so many questions coming in last year when I wrote this, which was around December, about the way that I discuss what happens with kids. And I always say what? It doesn't matter what your religion is. I worked with atheist children just fine and happy who could see ghosts, and prayer worked to help them. So I am finally going to address that in detail next week. So I would really appreciate it if you would tune in next week, and that will kind of settle some of the questions that you had about prayer. All righty. Thanks so much for joining. You guys have a wonderful rest of the week and a good weekend, and we'll chat next week. Bye bye.